Hello and welcome. There is a reverse migration happening in India of labor from factories to farms. Usually in India in the past and in most of the world, at least the developing world, it's the other way around where people go from farms to factories. Now, the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy has been monitoring these numbers. So has now the Consumer Preference Household Survey from the CMI shows that these numbers have been steadily rising or in recent years. But now the government's periodic labor force survey, or the PLFS as it's called, also shows an employment in agriculture from 42.5% of total employment in 1819 to 45.6 or roughly 46% in 2019-20. So the question is really twofold. One is that are we unique in as much as are we seeing a trend that's different from other parts of the world? And therefore, what does that mean? When in an economy at this time, this day and age, when the employment in the farm sector actually rises versus, let's say, the employment in the factory sector going down. So to discuss this, I'm joined by Mahesh Vyas, CEO of the Center for Monitoring of Indian Economy, or CMIE. Mahesh, thank you very much for joining us. So can I ask you in a very broad sense first, what is the total labor corpus that we have in India, and how has it been moving around as is evidenced by your own studies and what the government has been reporting?
So if you use the term corpus, it's an unusual term for the labor markets. The labor market is not used to in talking in terms of the corpus. But let me try and give you an answer to that. So when we talk about the labor force of a country or the workforce of a country, we usually talk in terms of people who are more than 15 years of age. So this is an arbitrary cutoff, but nevertheless it makes sense that people who are less than 15 years of age are more likely to be in school or should be in school and will not be participating in the labor force. So from 15 to 19 years of age, there's a gradual increase of these people coming into the labor force when they offer themselves for employment. So if you take the employment of more than 15 years in India, that's nearly 1 billion people. So that's the stock that we can talk of who could be possibly participating in the labor markets in India. Now, what happens is the world over, 15 years and more, a large proportion of that, of the order of 65% of these people, offer themselves for employment in the labor markets. That means they come to the labor markets and say, we are willing to look for a job. Most of them find work, and therefore a fairly large proportion, more than 55, 57%, actually finds employment. In India, the proportion of this large stock of people above 15 years of age who offer themselves for work is very low. According to our estimates, that number is like 42 to 43%. So that is the labor force. We call it the labor force. The first one is the population, then the labor force is around 42%. It's going even lower now, 41% or so. Of this, a certain number of people get jobs. That is the employed people. According to us at CMI, that number is of the order of 400 million people. So of the billion people or so, approximately 400 million people, 40% of them are actually employed in some way or the other. The government does not, the PLFS, for example, does not give you the absolute numbers. They only give ratios, then it is up to researchers to convert those ratios into actual numbers. The people who have done this in the past would give you a number which is anywhere between 450 and 470 or so. So the CMA number of employment is 400. The government's number could translate into 450 to 470.
Right. So if I were to use 400 million as the benchmark here, would you say that about 220 million or thereabouts are employed in factories and the balance in farm?
Oh no, the ratio is quite bad. So according to the CMI data, of the 400 million people who are employed, 150 million are in agriculture, 150 million are in services, about 90 million are in industry, of which only 30 million are in manufacturing and 60 million are in construction. So imagine only 30 million, less than 10% of the total number of people who are employed in this country are in manufacturing. This number has fallen. It used to be around 40 million. It's come down because of the stress we have had in the last couple of years.
Right. Now, tell us about this shift, which, according to the government's figures, is even more pronounced than what you have reported of people from from factory to farm. And what does this mean in a much broader macroeconomic sense, looking at the way trends usually evolve in developing countries?
So one of the big achievements India had after 91-92 liberalization was a big shift from farms to factories. So the debate in those days used to be that we have got jobless growth, but then researchers found out, although it was jobless growth, there was a big shift in favor of higher productivity from farms to factories. So on a net basis, we did not grow the jobs, but we did move people out from farms into factories. That is a great improvement in productivity for the country as a whole. In recent times, we have been seeing that because the non-farm sectors are not able to provide adequate jobs, and that makes sense because from 2011-12 or so, the investment ratio has just kept falling steadily down. So if investments don't happen, no new jobs don't get created, what will happen to the new labor force that comes? It will obviously try to come to cities to find jobs. If it doesn't find jobs, it will go back to farms and claim they're employed in farming. So there's a big shift, and that's very disturbing actually.
Right, and what does that mean? I mean, when more and more people are coming into the farm sector, which theoretically should have been going through its own evolution in terms of efficiency. So, are people gainfully employed? Are they not? Is there a way to measure that?
So when it comes to people employed in agriculture, there are two kinds. One is, for simplicity's sake, for simplifying the problem, let's say there are farmers and there are agricultural laborers. Now, there is a substantial increase in farmers, say, as a clerk or a security guard or something like that in a factory, because that factory could be an MSME in the rural sector shut down. This person lost her job and went back to her village and started doing what she was doing before she came to town or to the factory to work, which is being involved in carrying some firewood or shoveling some mud or some similar very low productivity job. But when you go and ask her whether she's employed, she will say, yes, I'm employed as a farmer in my fields. This is actually disguised unemployment. This person actually should have been classified as an unemployed person, but because she went back home and there was a small farm where you can always go and do something, she called herself employed. So that's disguised unemployment. Now, in CMI, we do not consider many of these people as employed because they're hardly doing any work, whereas in PLFS, they go to a great extent to say, even if you're doing a little work in your farm for family business, unpaid, we'll still call you employed. This is actually not a good thing in our measurement system. We need to recognize that women do work a lot and many men do work a lot, but they are not gainfully employed.
Right, and and there is the other point that you've mentioned. You've talked about that the biggest increase in employment was in agriculture, but within agriculture, the increase was largely amongst women. 60% of all employed women were engaged in agriculture. So, what does this mean again, Mahesh, from a specific and a larger point of view?
So, women work the hardest in our country, and I use the word work very deliberately, where I distinguish work from employment. So women are probably most likely doing 3 shifts. They are working in the fields, they are working at home, taking care of children and old people, and running the house. So they do all this, they're doing great work, but they are not fruitfully employed. So what happens is that they are mostly working in family enterprises, not adding much to the productive output, to the output. They're merely being involved, so they're spreading the available work very thinly. Ideally, we would have liked these women to be working in factories where the productivity is much higher, or in the services sector where productivity is also quite high. You can even shift from agriculture to construction. Even there, the productivity is high. So the normal transition is women who are not skilled, or even men who are not skilled, they move from farms to construction sites where they gain a few skills, where children of these people get better educated, and then move to factories. And then move to the services sector for even better productivity in some parts of the services sector. This transition, which is normal for every country in the world, in our case, because of lack of investments, because of stalling of our growth process, has reversed back from factories into farms. This is actually a structural problem that seems to be playing itself out. We require to work hard to come out of the hole we are digging ourselves into.
Right, and I'd come to the data discrepancy, if I want to call it that, in a moment, between what you're saying and the government is saying. But you know, the last 2-3 years have also seen a lot of foreign direct investment come in, mostly into the newer technology firms. You know, I'm talking about venture capital, private equity. So all of that is also creating jobs of a certain kind. Is that not having any impact on these numbers?
Not an adequate impact. So it obviously is having an impact. I mean, all the investments that are going into all kinds of e-commerce companies or other similar new age ventures, even fintech to a smaller extent, all of them are having an impact. But it's not adequate. It's not enough to employ lots of people for a long time and with good quality jobs. So I don't think, see, this is the problem. Every time we say that unemployment is rising or the employment numbers are not rising adequately, somebody says, look, these people are adding so many million jobs. IT companies are hiring so many more people. They are hiring lakhs of people right now. So obviously somewhere somebody is getting employed all the time. The point is, it doesn't add up to being adequate to absorb all of us sufficiently.
Right. And let me come to the data part. So the government's estimate of 45.6% of working population being employed in agriculture is higher than your estimate of people employed in agriculture, which is 38% for 2019-20. So broadly, why is this, and what does this tell us?
The difference is largely because they show more women working in agriculture. And I gave the example earlier. What happens is, now the number that 45% that the PLFS puts out is on what they call as the usual status, which is actually very, very lenient. The usual status effectively says that if a person is employed for approximately a month in an entire 365-day period, that person is called as employed for the year as a whole. Now, we don't make it so easy for a person. Even the CWS, the current weekly status that the PLFS uses, says that if you are employed for half a day in a 7-day period, you're employed. Now, mind you, if the person was employed for 30 days, let us say in the month of September of 2019, and then was employed throughout all the way till June 2020 and was desperately looking for a job, PLFS still says preference to employment. Although you are unemployed for 9 to 10 months of the year, you're still called employed because preference is given to employment. So A, it is too lenient. B, it has got too much of preference. Employment has got too much of preference. We don't do this. There is no preference in our system and there is no leniency in our system. We say, are you employed today? And if you can't say about today because you still got to go to daily wage worker to find a job, we ask you, were you employed yesterday? The answer is yes or no. You are either employed or you are not employed. And there is no recall problem, there is no leniency, there is no preference. So we are a lot more stringent, and therefore our number turns out to be lower. We have got a larger number of people who are out of the labor force, whereas PLFS takes them all into the labor force.
Right. So how much of this now is an impact of COVID? Now, you yourself have pointed out how we saw such dramatic surges in both directions. We saw unemployment shooting up to over 120 million and then dropping back dramatically to single digits within months or definitely less than a year. So how much of this could be reversible, and what are the larger macroeconomic portents which either point to reversibility or not?
At least insofar as what we see in the PLFS data or the surveys that we and PLFS conduct, and I called it as two kinds of employment, farmers and agricultural laborers. The agricultural laborers will lose their jobs in agriculture as soon as the sowing period is over, which is delayed currently, and they'll try and find jobs in daily wage worker kind of situations. So they will live on that very low productivity area for a very long time until the economy doesn't pick up. It's not very easy for them to get out of that situation. But the others, the farmers, they will find it very difficult to find gainful employment again because they have lost a salaried job mostly, or they have lost an enterprise that they were running, a small show that they were having is now wound up. They will find it very difficult to come back. So both agricultural laborers and farmers will find it difficult to come back to normalcy, and the normalcy wasn't good. So for us to, it's not important just to reverse this migration, but also to go back to a higher growth trajectory which you require to come back to people coming into more gainful, productive employment. I think it's really a tough, long ride ahead.
Right. And last question, Mahesh, so you broke it up nicely for us in the beginning, and you said that, there is employment, there is manufacturing, which is shrinking, there is services, and there is the farm sector. Now, what in this could there be some kind of, let's say, injection, which would perhaps lead some of these people back from the farm into the factory?
That's a policy initiative, and I'm not good at that. I don't do policy prescriptions. I do not know what needs to be done. All I can say is that redistribution is not a good idea. We require macroeconomics. Cherry picking is not a good idea. Doing PLI will not work. We require things like, no retrospective tax is a very good move. Reduction of, making it easier for enterprise to play, to come out and not punish failure. Those kind of things will help. But, policy prescription is beyond me.
Right. But these are, fundamental and long term, which would encourage enterprise, entrepreneurship, and new jobs, which will hopefully reverse the trend once again. Mahesh Vyas, CEO of CMI, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.